Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. I am your host of One Track Records, Shayna, and I am back as promised to deliver the second half of the story. And today's story again is the Roman version of none other than Cupid and Psyche. So, last episode, we left off with Cupid telling Psyche that he no longer wants to be with her. But I also have to put the disclaimer, per usual, that today's episode may not be for you, for those who are currently suffering with mental health. And this is not to stigmatize or cast shame or put down, but this can be triggering to some. So I always want to encourage those who may be feeling any type of depressed, anxious, anything that can or maybe isn't necessarily textbook. Okay? Please reach out to somebody, reach out to a loved one. I know in these times it's very hard, but being that if there's anything in society that's going right now, I would say it's definitely the importance of taking care of your mental health and seeking therapy if needed. It may not be for everybody, but I know people do tend to have different forms of therapy. Me being a musician, singer, I understand that very well. But sometimes it does require a professional. So, with that being said, please take care of yourself. And you may want to skip today's second half or the entire episode. I understand. I still love you. You're still my track star. Now, this is the second half of the story that deals with suicide as a disclaimer. And I don't recommend anyone under the age of 18, 17, really, to listen to this without parental consent. Also, it's important to mention that, again, with this story, it is synonymous with a lot of Greek characters, being that the culture changed, but the characters didn't. And I'm going to use another example within this second half of a particular character we meet aside from the ones we've met in the first part, which was Cupid, Psyche, Venus, and Apollo. In this second part, we kind of meet two characters, but I won't say they're not important, but you may know them as different names in the Greek versus the Roman, because I'm going to continue with the Roman version of this myth. So without further ado, let's dive in. So again, in our previous episode, we left off with belligerent Cupid telling his wife Psyche that he no longer wants to be with her or see her again because she broke his trust and went against his one wish, which was to remain hidden from her sight. So Psyche, now hysterical and feeling lonelier than ever and pregnant without the love of her life by her side, is wondering what's going to happen now as far as her being married and happy and feeling understood, because that's ultimately what she wanted more than anything, right? So Cupid, after abandoning Psyche, returns to Mount Olympus, only to find his jealous, intolerable mother Venus waiting for him. I'm so sick of him being a mama's boy. Like, every time I just read his name, I get a slight headache behind my right eye and it starts twitching. Because we all know that one person that's just like, he can't do nothing without the approval of his mom. Like, this is not going to work out. I'm not about to have him choose his mother over me every time. But here we are. So he returns to Mount Olympus only to find his jealous, intolerable mother Venus waiting for him. And also, key point in the story, remember, he typically comes back during the daytime, but his mother is waiting for him at night. And in the most condescending way possible, Venus questions Cupid why he's back during the nighttime, letting it be known she has studied her son's patterns of departure and return. Venus asks why for months he has come home to Mount Olympus during the day, leaving at night, followed by the dreaded question, where have you been? Cupid tries to physically shove his mom to back off as he's grown tired of her antics and whimpers in pain. And Venus notices the burn on his shoulder left from the hot oil from Psyche's lamp. Venus demands to know what has happened that would cause such a burn, but cuts her sentence short to take a whiff of Cupid and confirms that he smells as if he's in love because the scent is quote unquote all over him. Cupid quickly scoffs, downplaying the situation and denies his feelings. Nah, ma, you wildin'. In love? What are you talking about? Venus tries to narrow it down, asking if he's been with another nymph or muse, to which he denies confirming either. So Venus, adamantly tells Cupid to reveal who the mystery person was. And out of frustration and her giving him a whole badgering, basically just badgering him with questions, out it goes, and he just yells, "It's Psyche." Horrified, Venus listens to Cupid come clean about his clumsy and poorly executed arrow that went straight into his own thigh. Venus, however, only cares about how this situation will make her look like a laughingstock amongst the others on Mount Olympus. Now, Cupid tries to justify what happened, calling out his mother for seducing her fair share of mortals. However, according to Venus, this is different, being that the mortal is her sworn enemy and is in competition with her affection of other mortals. Just so funny how we now see that Venus is a narcissist and is dealing with the same kind of trouble that we saw in the myth Narcissus in the Greek. We went from having a narcissistic man to now dealing with the relationship of a narcissistic parent. But let's get back in. So Cupid assures Venus that either way, the initial plan has been fulfilled to make Psyche fall in love with the worst possible suitor, being that Cupid decided to leave Psyche pregnant and semi-abandoned. Venus laughs at Cupid, confirming that he still has fallen victim to his own doing because of the arrow, and that she now has to clean up his mess. Cupid, reasonably curious, is desperate to know what Venus's plan of action will be, hoping that Venus would leave Psyche untouched. Annoyed Venus commands Cupid to stay put while she goes to pay her fairly new daughter-in-law a visit. Venus then flies down Mount Olympus, causing doves to take off from every which way, making sure that Psyche knows that although she may have taken her offerings, she has no business taking her son. Bars. Okay, so Cupid tried to follow after his mother, but the door slams in front of him. He then randomly finds himself trapped inside a chamber with locked doors at every corner. When he realizes there is no point of escape at each door, he realizes this obviously was his mother's plan. Cupid, exhausted from trying to escape and also dealing with his emotions with Psyche, fell on the floor feeling defeated, sunken, and head in his hands. Oh, pobrecito. Shortly after, Cupid is visited by a hawk who managed to enter the room within a small crevice from the skylight. As the hawk has its talons hit the floor, it transforms to none other than the god Apollo. Apollo asks Cupid, why is he so down? While condescendingly asking if it's his mother that makes him miserable. Cupid asks, how'd you know? While Apollo confirms, as he was flying around chasing after one of Venus's doves, he overheard the conversation. Reluctantly, Cupid asked Apollo for another favor. Apollo, rolling his eyes, asked Cupid, what is it? Cupid asks if Apollo can watch over pregnant Psyche, being that he knows trouble will be brewing once Venus catches wind of where she is. Now, Apollo is taken aback after finding out at that very moment that Psyche is pregnant, and Cupid is going to be a father. Cupid interjects Apollo, saying he will be an absent father, being that they are no longer together. Now, your boy Apollo, he's not having it. So this is why it's important to have friends that don't just agree with everything you do, but hold you accountable. Because look at this. See, Venus is so used to having a narcissistic mother. And again, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm not trying to necessarily diagnose or confirm that you think it's okay to diagnose people. We're talking about tendencies here and mythological creatures. So I'm allowed to do this. Side note, sidebar. And this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. However, Cupid is so used to being abused by a narcissistic parent that he doesn't even see that his mother's influence is now rubbing off on her. On him. You see this? Like, I got to reread that part again because I had to take notes for all this. This is all oral tradition mythology. I had to transcribe it. So that's why it always takes me this long to drop some fire. Okay? I love y'all that much. So let's go back. Apollo yells at Cupid asking, I thought you were in love with her. You're going to go abandon her and be an absent father? So Cupid cries, I am in love with her. So Apollo then claps back. So let me get this straight. You trick her father into abandoning her with my help from the oracle in my temple. Okay. You have the king lead her to an isolated home off of a cliff. You lock her up, being that she can't go anywhere or see who you are. You then desert her now because you love her? So Apollo's like, yo, whose man's is this? This is love? How? Okay. So then Cupid cried, well, she betrayed me, Apollo. She saw me in the light and saw who I was. So here goes Apollo. Oh, I love him in this moment. So she looked at you. So that was a means to an end for your union? Cupid explains his reasoning by saying, it's ruined now because he isn't sure if her feelings for him are genuine now because his identity is confirmed. Cupid is scared that Psyche now admires him, but may never love him for who he is and not for what he is. So he's more concerned, well, she knows I'm a god. What if she actually has affection for me because of what I am, but not who I am to her? And he does make a good point, ladies. He does make a good point. And this is why I purposely set up a part 2, because I want this part to be separate from the disdain you may have had for him in part 1. So from Cupid's perspective, being in the dark and being intimate with Psyche made them equals. It was as if he didn't have to worry about him being immortal and her being mortal, or worry about what he looked like to her. Baffled, Apollo chastises Cupid, letting him know he has never in his life heard of such a conceited reason for disregarding someone. So Apollo asks, as the god of love, how is it that you don't know you can't truly love someone without full and total honesty? So Cupid replies, love also required trust, and Psyche has betrayed mine. I gotta admit, ladies, it's true. While he wasn't fully honest about what he was, it also does require trust. Now, Apollo now questions why Cupid would even require his help, being that he's abandoned her and the baby she's carrying. So Cupid says Apollo just needs to make sure Psyche is safe from all harm Venus may inflict, since he is bound in said chamber and can't do it himself. So Apollo confirms he can help Cupid escape if he would stop acting like the little winged cherub everyone portrays him to be, and to man up and get his girl back. Now, Cupid, blinded by his heart and not focusing within his mind, still can't see what Apollo means. So Apollo tells him to stay there and ponder some more while he goes to hunt down Venus from bothering Psyche. Boy, oh boy. Meanwhile, Psyche sat down in the meadow, and it's still nighttime, waiting to see if Cupid may return. Hours passed and the night sky turned into dawn, and of course, all she could think was, where's my man? So suddenly, Psyche feels a flutter in her womb, confirming that she would have to be brave through this process, if not for herself, then for her unborn child. Psyche, being willing to sacrifice everything she had, thought it would be enough to go into the temple of Venus in order to see if her beloved would return to her. After all, she thought, what better person to go to for advice than her own mother-in-law? You see what keeping sis in the dark did? Now she's still kept in the dark, even after she done saw you, because she doesn't even know your own mother don't like sis. Okay, shame on you. So Psyche, alone and frightened and pregnant, goes to the temple, shuts the door behind her, and asks if anyone was in attendance. Psyche freezes as she sees a priestess standing at the altar with her back turned. Psyche apologizes for the intrusion, stating how she came to pay her respects to Venus. The priestess, back still turned towards Psyche, asks, "What would a mortal such as yourself have to offer the goddess of desire?" "My servitude," cried Psyche. "I offer myself in exchange for Venus's forgiveness." The priestess replies, "Fair enough. Now prove it." The priestess turns around, revealing her identity as Psyche, in astonishment, recognizes her face. Before Psyche could utter another word, Venus snaps her fingers and in a blaze of fire is transferred from the temple straight to Mount Olympus with Psyche. Psyche falls to her knees in awe as Venus commands her, "Stand to your feet." Venus coldly asks, "So this is who took my son from me? The incarnation of Venus?" Mockingly shares her disdain. "I am here as penance for defying your beauty," states Psyche, "and betraying Cupid's trust. My wish is to be reunited with my husband." "Husband?" Venus scoffs. "However did you think that this marriage was valid?" She continues saying, "Jupiter himself would have to bestow his blessing, and how she is not thrilled to have a bastard grandchild." What in the Maury is going on? Okay. Woo. Angry Psyche claps back, "Legitimate or illegitimate, my child deserves a father and shouldn't have to deal with the consequences of my wrongdoings." Venus promises, "If you show that you can obey my every command, I will make sure to reunite you with Cupid." And she snaps her finger again. This time, Venus has transferred herself and Psyche to her aviary with hundreds of white doves. Now, Psyche, amazed by the amount of doves, is given her first task to prove her obedience. So here's the rules and regulations of this first task. From a giant mound of seeds as tall as Psyche, she is to separate each grain of seeds in order to feed her doves. And within the mound of seeds is a plethora of different types to feed on. So Psyche, her task is to separate every single grain of wheat, corn, millet, barley, poppies, etc., into tinier and more compact piles according to each grain. Now, Psyche, feeling defeated before attempting the task, cries, "That's impossible!" Meanwhile, Venus proclaims, "Not for a living goddess to accomplish by nightfall." Shortly into sorting seeds, Psyche now understands Venus had no intent to reunite her son and Psyche, but to punish her for being the apple of Cupid's eye. As she began to lose hope in her task, a familiar hawk flies down to Psyche in the aviary. Psyche, watching the hawk come to a screeching landing on a dirt pile, shortly after watched within that dirt pile a colony of ants headed straight towards the pile of grain. In a state of panic, she watched the ants come to separate piles, and within the separate piles, she recognized that each ant did the work to separate each grain by type of seed. Psyche, in amazement and dropped jaw, could not believe what was happening before her very eyes. A few hours later, Venus is surprised to find every single grain separated and accounted for. Venus, in disbelief, accuses Psyche of being sneaky and dishonest, thinking she, of course, received help of some kind and couldn't possibly have done such a task on her own. And once again, with the snap of her finger, she transfers herself and Psyche to complete yet again another ridiculous task in now a luscious green valley. So here are the terms and conditions of Psyche's second task to show her obedience to Venus. Psyche is now assigned a more challenging task to collect wool from a herd of golden sheep. Now, at first sight of seeing this doesn't really seem like such a complicated or, it's like, what? But here's the challenging part. The sheep tend to disembowel anyone who steps foot within their path. As Psyche reflects on how she would be able of achieving the impossible, she yet again hears a familiar hawk nearby as he swoops down to assist per usual. After following the hawk, she finds a bricket of briars or thorns, and to Psyche's benefit, the thorns had already been covered in golden wool. She then created a basket of all the wool she found and pulled from the thorns, only to yet again get Venus worked up. Venus once again assumes Psyche has cheated her way through another task. Now, Venus explains being that she is a forgiving, quote unquote, and charitable person, or deity, decides to give Psyche one last chance as they appear back on Mount Olympus. Now here goes the third and final task. Psyche is to go down to the underworld on Venus's behalf and borrow beauty from Queen Persephone, who is the wife of Pluto. And this is where in the story we see the difference in culture, because for those who are somewhat familiar with Greek mythology, we know in this story, in the Roman mythology, Queen Persephone is actually Persephone in the Greek. And Pluto of this Roman myth is Hades in the Greek. Now, yet another example where things get lost in translation. You see the power of language and cultures? And this is why I tell everybody of the importance of communications and linguistics. Shout outs to Alan Blank. Okay? I love you. You're my bro from across the pond. Now let's get back. She supplies Psyche with a box to put the beauty in from Persephone and states, she won't really miss it anyways if Psyche takes it. So go ahead and do that for me. So Psyche soon puts 2 and 2 together and tells Venus that because she is mortal, the only way she can enter into the underworld is through death. Venus tells her that she's almost sure she will be able to complete the task, being that she's so clever and resourceful that it won't be a problem. So we see in the next scene, after Venus departs from Psyche, Psyche is frightened and melancholy and decides to stand over a cliff of Mount Olympus, and she looks down past multiple clouds, and she stands there, and it becomes more and more real to her, trigger warning, that Venus has sent her on an suicide mission. Psyche, with her mind, begins to ponder as she began to think, if she passes away during her mission, more than likely, Venus would not revive her or reunite her with Cupid as she allegedly promised. Also worth mentioning, if she failed this mission, her and her unborn child would be gone forever without ever seeing Cupid again for eternity. But what choice did she have? So Psyche steps closer to the edge of the cliff off of Mount Olympus and taking one final breath before she decided to jump, she heard her good friend, the hawk, and stopped in her tracks. Psyche, in astonishment, watched the hawk cry in the sky and perch his huge talons on a boulder on the side. Apollo yells to not take another step and prompts Psyche to follow him. Apollo now guides Psyche down a winding path from the top of the mountain into the mouth of a mysteriously dark waterfall. As Apollo cuts through the wall of water, Psyche gathered herself, still scared in the mind, and continues to follow. As she reaches the other side of the waterfall, she is confused and wonders why she is still dry despite all the water she crossed. Apollo had perched, waiting for her to draw closer and continue guiding the way through multiple stones. She asked him, "What is this place?" And Apollo replies, "A different path to the underworld." He then proceeds to tell her with caution providing directions on how to reach, as he cannot travel the entire way with her, and warns that one wrong move and all is lost. He proceeds to tell Psyche that the danger does not end even after she resurfaces, because if she disobeys his one rule not to open the box after Persephone seals her beauty within, then she's threatened with consequences. As Apollo wishes pregnant Princess Psyche good luck, she thanks him and departs along the mentally and physically agonizing journey. She turns back quickly before he takes flight to ask how ever will she repay him for all of his help. Sarcastically, Apollo tells her that she isn't the one to repay any debts. I know that's right, because Cupid is an annoying friend. I do not want to be friends with him. He needs too much. Go ask your mama, since she always want to deal with you. Drained. That's a draining friendship. But anyway, so Apollo soared back through the waterfall as she starts down her path. Now, meanwhile, Apollo takes flight back to Mount Olympus to Cupid's chamber, flying through the skylight, and takes form again as a god. Apollo assures Cupid has done everything within his power to make sure Psyche is safe from harm. However, Venus's hate has sent Psyche on an suicide mission where he dare not guide her physically. Fearful Cupid begins to cry, stating that she needs his help, and in frustration asks Apollo again how he will get out of his mother's imprisonment. Oh, now you want to cry? I thought you ain't love Shorty and you wanted to break up. Sorry. I just have a lot of word vomit. He's very triggering. I'm out here really swinging my fist in the air like, yo. Anyway. Apollo tells him, I already told you, you have to go back to your wife. Ignorant Cupid demands that Apollo refrain from speaking in riddles and to just plainly tell him what it is he should do. With Cupid's sense of urgency and concern, every single door within the chamber had opened simultaneously. Cupid, turning to Apollo, is now bewildered as he watched Apollo with a wide grin on his face. As Apollo congratulates Cupid on becoming a man and not acting like a cherub, Cupid runs for the nearest exit to make his way towards his love. Meanwhile, we see Psyche making her way to the underworld, box in hand from Venus. She has completed each and every one of Apollo's instructions to the T, as her life and her newborn's life depends on it, or I should say, her unborn child's life. She descended further into the waterfall's caves, coming across the river Styx, paying the ferryman to take her across to the other side to Pluto's kingdom. As she approached, she had a myriad of people awaiting her and charmed every soul there, convincing Queen Persephone to place her beauty into the box and go about her way. After successfully convincing Queen Persephone to place her beauty within the box and go about her way, She departed, making her way back to the other side of the river Styx. And as she's riding on said ferry, Psyche peered into the surface of the water, recognizing for the first time ever in life that she was not so lovely anymore. As she gazed upon an exhausted, unkempt reflection due to the tiresome journey ahead, she realized, unlike the other tasks, this one surely has drained Psyche's beauty. With her mind stirring and continuing across the waters, she began to think, what if after completing all of these tasks, that perhaps Cupid may still not even want her and think she's not as beautiful as she once was? She thought to herself, it's bad enough I betrayed him, but now I'm not even as beautiful as he last saw me in this meadow. And Psyche had meticulously followed each instruction of Apollo's until she makes her first mistake within the path of her thoughts instead of the path of her journey. As she makes it out of the waterfall and into the light of day, Psyche takes a peek into the box, disregarding Apollo's one rule in hopes to take some of the beauty for herself. But as she slowly lifted the beautifully carved lid, there was nothing inside, except for an unpleasant odor. As she took a deep breath, enough breath of the odor, Psyche immediately collapses to the ground unconscious. Ooh, child. You see what happens when you chase beauty unnecessarily? Now, shortly after, Cupid finds her at the cusp of the waterfall, halfway between the mouth of the underworld and the mouth of sunlight. And in his mind, he believes he has come too late. He weeps until he sniffs the air around her, realizing that Psyche had inhaled Stygian's sleep, which is quote-unquote the slumber of the dead. And as he smelled the odor and watched the fallen empty box nearby, he knew this was a ruse derived by none other than Venus. In a grave, desperate attempt to save his love, Cupid takes one of his arrows and lightly pricked Psyche, begging her to come back to him. Psyche began to stir and gasped for breath. Elated to see each other again, Psyche compliments Cupid's beauty in the sunlight and apologized for not trusting him. Cupid corrects her by apologizing and stated he is in fact sorry for not trusting us. But in the same breath, Cupid commends Psyche for doing so, risking everything including their child, and admits he should have never planned to abandon them. Now Psyche forgives Cupid and states as long as he never plans to leave again, she will always forgive him. Cupid ensures he will never leave again for all of eternity. The story now ends when Cupid asks Jupiter to give Psyche the gift of immortality through drinking ambrosia and became a goddess, and the two were now formally wedded. Psyche and Cupid gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Pleasure, confirming true pleasure is only found in love connected between the heart and the mind. Now, Venus begrudgingly is okay with such an ending, because being that Psyche is no longer mortal and her temples and altars can come to life again, she kind of deaded the beef between them. And she's now happy that her temples and altars are no longer barren. Now that ends the second part of Cupid and Psyche. And I don't want to tie up too much of your time, so I will be back. I don't know if it will be Sunday. It might be sooner. But if you don't hear from me earlier, you will hear from me again Sunday. And I'm going to further describe a few things, because there's a few elements to this story that some may recognize in other tales throughout history, more so of the history of storytelling in a few fairy tales from the 1800s. And I want you guys in the comments to see if you can identify some of the attributes of today's Roman myth, and see if there's any correlation between the story tales, specifically that girls are raised on. And this is why, for this podcast, I stress, as far as relationships, why it's important to restore the relationship within yourself and to have self-reflection and to identify the things in the mirror, or the figurative, metaphorical mirrors, I should say. The things that are so deeply rooted that you'd never think twice about, that leave you stuck, or like Psyche, leave you in the dark. And I want to more so cater towards the women right now. Men, give me a moment, because I know this is a seedy episode. But with everything that has happened, I want to speak to single women right now, because I recognize in today's day and age, there are a lot of psyches. And I'm not speaking of the mind or the different ways of the mind. I'm speaking to women who carry themselves like Psyche, who make it known to men that they feel misunderstood, and they start to tell people what they want, what they're looking for, when really it was Cupid's job, and he did this oh so well, to learn to understand her. She never confronted him and told him what she was looking for. But in the same breath, what did he initially do to get her? He learned her wants and desires to hurt her. Not intentionally, but he did. So, loving someone despite your better judgment, even if it's done incorrectly, still causes a lot of damage, because we have to look at the facts here and call a spade a spade. In order for her to feel like she can be complete with the different types of love, like I've mentioned in the previous episode, she wanted that Eros love. She wanted agape love. She didn't necessarily have that brotherly love, did she? She didn't, you never in this story heard of a friend other than Apollo, but who was Apollo? That's Cupid's friend. See, your boyfriend's friends aren't your friends. You need your own friends. I'm talking to somebody. Now, in the same breath, did she get the familial love she wanted in the end? Yes. And Venus grew to love her, but not necessarily by choice. But ultimately, she was happy with what type of love, aside from Eros? Agape. She then realized her happiness really came from her being in full alignment with heart and mind through unconditional love, agape love, the sacrificial love, being that despite her putting everything on the line to make sure she gets her man back, this love might not be returned. And she had no choice but to sit there and deal with the possibility of that love never returning and her possibly losing not just her life, but her unborn's life. If that's not the heaviest act of agape love, but you know who's shown the best agape love? And I think some of you know where I'm going with this. God in flesh. Yep. Moment of silence for JC. He took a lot. He also descended and came down and went through an agonizing journey for 30 plus years, according to the book. Right? Knowing it's a possibility that even though he is the sacrificial lamb that the Bible calls him, as far as the new covenant, he is the sacrificial lamb decided for you. Whether you wanted to accept him or not, he still did it for you. And me, I'm going to speak on my behalf because I can't really speak for anybody else here. But I can say, as a young woman who is single, who the world wants to make feel that because I'm 30 plus, that I should have kids, I should have a man, I should start a family, all that, yada, yada, yada. Everybody's expectations thrown on me. Most people don't even come to realize you can have all that and still be unhappy. As much as people love going, even this time of year, what is it, September? People want to go to start their plans to get matching flannels to go to the pumpkin patches, to take pictures with their boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, whatever, with the kids. You don't see past the picture. You don't see what happens after they post a picture if they're arguing in the car about their finances after wasting all that money to buy matching flannels and butters. You don't see none of that, right? But here I am, single, feeling all four types of love the Bible talks about. I have God Almighty giving me the agape love I need. I have family giving me the love I need. I have friends giving me the love I need. Don't necessarily have the Eros, because I want to also make mention. Eros love outside of proper context is irresponsible and is offense to the Most High. And you see, I wanted to save that Eros love for last, because I know, even given in today's myth, the men can now enter back in the chat if you haven't already entered. You see, Venus, as much as a narcissistic parent as she was right in telling her daughter-in-law that the marriage in itself may not be as real as she thinks, because she wasn't exactly married formally. She was married informally, meaning just because you have relations and consummate your relationship, yeah, you're married. You think you may be married to someone physically, but what you're really doing is marrying their spirit. And that's what, when it comes to antiquity, I appreciated about the Egyptians. Ancient Egyptians in the days of antiquity, which was history before it was written text, talks about those strongholds that people have over you through sexual contact that many of you probably are dealing with now. Okay? So what would I be doing if I irresponsibly decided to have sexual contact with someone and consummate a marriage that isn't a marriage? If you catch my drift. Spiritually, that is very irresponsible. And I can create further consequences for myself than had I not dealt with someone in those regards at all. And I'm not here to judge anybody. We've all fallen short when it comes to the glory of God. And I myself have done a lot of stupid things. But the Bible also talks about when you're a child, you do childish things. And when you become a full adult, man or woman, you leave the childish things behind you, right? So, with all that being said, and in love, I encourage you, whether you are in a relationship or not, in a marriage or not, and sometimes you may be confronted with the problem between your heart and your mind, whether it is you need to stay in said relationship or not deal with somebody at all. Think about how God gives you the confirmation that real love in all four chambers of today's story need to be aligned with your heart and your mind. And the Bible also talks about the heart of man being wicked. But you know how you love people properly? When you begin to chase God and love God more than you love that relationship or those relations. And don't be fooled. For those who are not married but are in a relationship, there are many ways that you can be intimate with your partner without relations. In my experience of dating while not being intimate, there has been plenty of things I have partaken in that are intimate and I did not have to do as mentioned. But the most intimate way I can get close to the person who I'd like to have relations with but won't, and to God at the same time, was getting into this owner's manual, aka the book. Yep. I paused on purpose. So I'm not here to necessarily tell you what to do all I can really tell you is from my experience, what has made me feel fulfilled as a young woman in today's society, and why the inevitable question of why are you still single? Why don't you have any kids? Why this? Why that? You know why? Because my focus is on the man who created me, so that when I spend enough time with him, I won't go hurting the other people he created and the son he created for me. And it's also my responsibility, just like in the other relationships of the story that Cupid had to deal with, as much as my parent might hurt me, and by no means is my mother narcissistic. In fact, while she has spoiled me, she hasn't spoiled me rotten. There's a difference. And we're going to get into that type of relationships between parent and child. But hang tight. If there's anything that I want you guys to take note of before I depart for tonight, and yes, I'm recording this at night, I want you guys to take heed of certain details in the story. So, if you notice and you paid close enough detail, you notice that there's many chambers that are spoken of in this story. And in my humble opinion, I do believe those chambers also represent parts of the heart, because Cupid, being the god of love, represents none other than the heart. And in the heart, there's what? Chambers. Now, in my humble opinion, the chambers that he had to deal with were 4. He had to deal with the one of his mom, locking him in that room, which is the familial type of love. He also had to deal with his own castle with his wife, or his illegitimate wife, dealing with Eros love, eroticism. Then there kind of was also another chamber, informally known as what? The temple, of where he had Apollo lying to the king to get the princess to come along and marry him informally, right? But then also there was what? The chamber was the dwelling of the waterfall where he found his love slumped over. And that 4th one right there, of him restoring that sacrificial love so that he would be able to feel whole. And while she represents the mind, he represents the heart. We need to recognize also it takes 2 whole people. Psyche had to learn how to use her mind, because she already had the heart to love her man. Meanwhile, Cupid already had the heart, but had to learn how to use his mind to get his shorty back. Aha! When God is finished, or I should say, it's the right season where he restores your heart, he restores your mind. And the 2 are to become one, not just through flesh, but through spirit. Then he will bless your relationship. Because what? Inevitably, for God to have you prepared for the right type of relationship within his will, he's going to make sure both of you are equipped. But he also wants what? He wants your heart, and he wants you to love him above your relationship with each other. All right, you know what? Because I'm preaching and it's not even Sunday anymore. So, just a few gems that have been weighing on my heart. And this is why I've been taking my time with this. But again, I will be back, if not in a few days, definitely by Sunday. And we're going to talk about the inner child when it comes to this story, and how, specifically for women, we've kind of been brainwashed into thinking that we have to sacrifice so much in order to obtain love. But we've been sacrificing the wrong things. Men too, but specifically women in today's society have been focused and brainwashed since childhood into sacrificing the wrong things in order to obtain the wrong type of love. And with that being said, again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. I hope the rest of your day goes well and you find this in good spirits. Thank you again for hitting the like button, for sharing the content, for donating. And ultimately, my favorite are the comments you guys leave. You guys are amazing, and you make it so worthwhile. Again, I'm not trying to do this for profit, for any type of profit, but thank you for those who have donated to the Cash App. Again, my Cash App, if you're interested, is Shay, SHAY, One Track Record, all one word. And thank you for the donations, because you're only enhancing the content. Okay, I'm still learning a few things when it comes to the programs and whatnot, but thank you for bearing with me. I love you, track stars. Y'all take care, all right? Peace.